Hello everybody, welcome back to Creating Hanley. I am Kimberly at Creating Hanley, and we are continuing this Square in a Square series. And I have created a tiny square in a square here, and we're going to add another layer to this. So if you've watched the other videos, the previous tutorials, I showed you 3 different ways to at least 2 different ways to create this block right here. The first one was the easy no waste square, and that's this one right here. Now, there's a flaw in this method in that, so go back and watch that video so you can see how we got to this point, but there's a flaw in that method in that when you trim your block, you do not have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You don't have enough fabric right here to maintain this point. So when you put the next layer on, you will lose that point. Okay, so that was the first video, but that video is the easy no waste square in a square block, and that's because we did the 1-to-1 ratio, and we put right sides together. We sewed all the way around to make like a ravioli, and then on the fabric that you want on the sides of your theme piece, then you would, so I'm just recapping real quick here, but you should really go back and watch that video so you know what I'm talking about. Then you poke a little hole through here, and then you cut your 4 diagonals, and then you wing those open, and then you have like a window, like a surprise box. Whoop. And then you have this. Now when you trim it, here's a couple of problems. One, these are now on bias, so your fabric can get a little stretchy. And also when you trim it, and I did an example right here, when you trim this, because now these little diamonds are on the outside, but when you trim those back, you see not enough fabric for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if I get my measuring gauge right here and I put it right to the top of that star, you can see there's no, or the point right at the top of the point, there's no fabric there to catch in the next layer, or a sashing, or the joining of the next block or whatever. So you're going to miss, or you're going to lose that point. Okay, so that was the inherent problem with the first method. Now the second and third method saves this point. The second method, I believe, was the bigger one. I think the second method was the bigger one, and I trimmed this up, which you can see there's plenty of fabric there to allow a 1/4 inch seam. See how that? So there's plenty of fabric to allow a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So even if you did a 1/4 inch seam allowance right there, you can see there's another at least 1/4 inch or less for to save the point. So there's a lot more fabric on that one. Okay, on this method. So I think this was method 2. Method 3 was the same way to sew it. No, I take that back. Same way to sew it, but different cut. So on this one you have 2 extra background squares. On this one you only have 1 extra background square. So watch all 3 videos. But the joining of the triangles is the same. But you can see on this method there is a little bit less fabric. So the point will still be there. If I put my 1/4 inch gauge up there right at the edge of the fabric, there's still enough fabric that the points are saved. So that should be the same all the way around. Okay, you get it. You get it, right? So if I put my little gauge right at the edge of the fabric, there's still enough. Let me try to line that up. There's still enough, and the lighting isn't right in here. Anyway, there's enough fabric that you don't lose your points on method 2 and 3. So check those out. Now, I want to go a step further, and I don't necessarily want to join these together, but maybe I want to put another square around this one. So maybe I have this as my fussy cut, and I'm reading this in a project for whatever it is, a pillowcase or a quilt or even just a wall hanging or something. Now this is on point, right? So I want to square this up, and so I want to add another layer. But how do we go ahead and do that? So I'm going to show you in this video right here on how to add another layer. Okay, so let's get to it. So what I did was I created a little square. This is a 2.5 inch. This is a 2.5 inch block. Okay, so 2.5 inch block. And then I added my fabric to the outsides in the same method that I did this one. So I had 2 blocks. So for example, let me shift this aside. Here is my 2.5 inch square, and this is directional fabric. And then I have 2 extra cut 2.5 inch squares that I just cut on the diagonal. And then you put those on all 4 sides. So you have 4 triangles at that point, okay? Just like this. So I had 2 and then 2 squares. So see how that works? 2 squares, and then you cut the diagonal, and now you have 4 triangles, okay? So, that is that, okay? So that is that one. This is this put together. This is this put together. So if you look at the direction, I have directional fabric here. So I kind of wanted to read the happy birthday. So even though I had to cut it a little bit, you still can kind of see what that says. Okay. All right, now I have more directional fabric here. So if you check this out, again, these are drink glasses. So if I'm looking at it as you are, I want to make sure that my drink glasses are kind of going in the correct direction. So I have to align these up so that my directional fabric is showing the way I want it to show. Okay? And even if I put this on point like that, all the drink glasses are going in the same direction, okay? So I'm using directional fabric on purpose to show you how that works, okay? So, now, when we did this first block, remember in the centerpiece, we folded it in half lengthwise, and then we folded it in half widthwise, and we finger pressed, and then we got our creases. So that showed us exactly where the middle of the fabric was, so that when we put down our triangles, and then on the triangle we folded that too, creased it, so now we have the middle of the triangle. So we line up the middle of the block with the middle of the triangle. Put the 2 sides together. Make sure your point goes into the opposite side as well, along that same line, so you know exactly that you're in the middle. You sew that across, and then you do the same thing on the opposite side. So you don't go around, from one side to the next to the next. You go from opposites. So I sew this one here, and then I sew this one here, and then I sew on that side and that side. Okay? So that's a quick recap of what happened. Now, to put this next layer on, what I did was once I trimmed this block, I found out what the dimension is. So it's a 3.5 inch block. So now this 2.5 inch block has become a 3.5 inch block. So I cut 2 3.5 inch blocks, and then from diagonal to diagonal, I cut those in half. and created my triangles. Okay, you can see that they're quite a bit bigger. They overhang quite a bit on that side, okay? And that's what you want. That overhang is important because that is how you get the space you need so you don't lose your points. That's the critical part, okay? So now, this is going to be different. Now, if you have that old line in there from the original, so you can see the original line that I creased was in here, okay? That's still a little bit showing it, but you don't use that one. Now your new block size is this. So you take this edge to this edge, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult because of all these little seams in here. And also, this might be stretchy, so you need to be careful because you're on the bias. So finger press that down, open that out. That is my new center. This is my new center right there. And then you do that same thing to this side. Be very careful. Line up those corners, line up the edges, finger press down. Now, if you want to, you could add a hot iron. Just gently place it on. Don't move it around. Just gently place it down for a couple seconds and then lift it up. And then there is your new center crease. And then you do the same thing. Fold these in half, point to point, if I can get it, point to point, and then gently finger press, and you should have a, your point should actually be in half too, okay? So you open those up. Do that to all 4 triangles. And now we're going to do the same method. So make sure before you begin, if you have directional fabric, that you know where your fabric triangles are going to attach to the square. Okay? So once you have that, this is the way I want it. Now I'm going to take these 2 apart, and I know I want this to go on this side. And I line up that seam to the top. Not seam, this edge, this fold edge to the other fold edge, and then when I go straight down, I can see my tip of the triangle is right in that fold as well. So I'm gonna pop, and remember in the other video, I also said, here's a little tip, you can place your pin right in the center of that fold, and then it should go into the center of the bottom piece as well. So now you know those are lined up, okay? Now I'm just gonna leave this pin in place because now I'm gonna shift my fabric to the other way, to the opposite way, and I'm gonna pin this down as well. So right sides together, find the fold, put the fold on the fold, line up this straight edge, and then this point is in the same line as this fold too. Perfect. Okay, now if you want to, you could pop a pin in there just to be sure. But I'm just going to take this right to the machine, and I sew my 1/4 inch seam allowance, start off the square, and then sew all the way across, straight across. Okay, so now I've caught, you can see I sewed off of the square, started off the square, and then sewed it straight across 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I can gently open this up, and this is a critical part. You want to make sure that this stays open before you place your sides on, okay? And now I'm going to sew this side. Make sure that is in the correct place. Start off of the square, straight down 1/4 inch, and then sew off of the square again. Okay? Just like so. Now, you can press this if you want, hot press it down, which I always like to do because I like to work with a flat surface. And if it's just finger press, sometimes it's a little puffy. So there you go. There's that. Now, I don't want to lose my directional fabric, so I moved and jiggled things around. So I want to make sure, just come in and reassess here. Is this how I want it to go? And yes, it is. So now I'm going to take this side and I'm going to find that fold and place this side directly on the fold, and my point is on the fold all the way down there. And then you do the same thing here. Fold, and it meets, and it's perfect. So you can pop a pin in there if you like so things don't shift. I'm going to just leave it and then sew 1/4 inch seam allowance straight down, off, shift it around, and this hasn't moved, so we're good there. Start off of the fabric, sew all the way across till you sew off of the other side. Okay? So you start off the fabric, sew all the way across until you sew off of the other side. Now you open these up like a window, like a surprise gift, and you can see your points are saved. Point up here is saved. The point on this side, saved. This side, saved. And this side, oops, is saved. That's why I like to press them open so that everything is flat. And the fabric stays. I'm going to add a little bit of steam. So I don't have steam in my machine. I just use the water bottle. And you just press down, lift up, press down, lift up, press down, press down. So you don't want to swirl the fabric around. And there you go, guys. That is how you add another layer. And that is how you protect those points. So you can see that point is perfectly there. It's protected. It's protected. All your points are perfect and they're protected. Now what you would do is trim this outer layer, and if you wanted to add another layer, you'd do the exact same process. So you trim this up. Whatever this dimension is you cut 2 more of the same dimension. Slice those in half diagonal. Now this piece becomes your middle square. And you fold that new piece in half. Be careful of the bias. And then you fold it in half this way. And now you have just found your middle. In fact, your middle is probably going to be right at those points. So you should be able to line up those points and those points. Those, you probably can't even see that. I'm looking at it, but those are going to be your, and that goes straight down now. Those points, if you did it right and it's not wonky, those are going to be your middle line. That's going to be your middle line. Okay? And in fact, it should recrease your first center square. Now it's upside down, but because I'm using directional fabric. Okay? Does that make sense? So now this is your new center square, and you square this up, and whatever size this becomes, then you cut 2 more of your outside layer, and you do the exact same process. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So that's how you add an extra layers to your square in a square. All right, guys, have fun with that. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I read all of them. So happy creating, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.